to serve. I am here to introduce the panel discussion Unstable Ground, the Changing Political Landscape, Pardons and Expungements in Pennsylvania, a part of Public Interest Week. We'd like to thank our esteemed panelists, our audience, the Toll Public Interest Center, and Penn Cary Law School for supporting this event. I'd also like to thank Megan Murray and Kay Ajayi for their hard work to make this event happen. This panel has been organized by Penn Law's Pardon Project and Criminal Record Expungement Project. As we reflected on the theme of this year's Public Interest Week, Unsettled, it became clear that one of the most immediate pressing issues was the 2022 midterm elections. Because pardons, expungements, and clemencies are unavoidably tied to politics and who is in office, we wanted to further explore how the election results will have an impact on outcomes and opportunities for people seeking relief from their criminal sentences. We're honored to have a phenomenal panel of experts on criminal justice issues in Philadelphia and in the state of Pennsylvania today. Our panel will be moderated by Taylor Pacheco, a Penn Law alumna and Deputy Director at Philadelphia Lawyers for Social Equity. Prior to joining Pulse, Taylor worked at the New Jersey Office of the Public Defender and the Support Center for Child Advocates. She was a volunteer with CREP while at Penn and now helps coordinate CREP for Penn students today. We are also joined by Sabira Williams, a staff attorney at the Amistad Law Project. Sabira was motivated to become an attorney by her family's experience with incarceration. Her work is driven by an understanding that to end mass incarceration, people need resources like jobs and quality education, so they are not funneled into an endless cycle with the criminal legal system. Next, we'd like to introduce Akeem Sims. Akeem is a community leader and is involved in many local programs that work to address family poverty, drug addiction, and incarceration. Akeem received a pardon from Governor Wolf, which has allowed him to pursue his dream career in financial services, and he has since launched his own company, Blayton Financial Services. Finally, we're joined by Brendan Lynch, a senior attorney at Community Legal Services. Brendan has worked at CLS for over 2 decades and currently works in the employment unit where he represents low-income workers in a wide range of matters. He also helps coordinate the Pardon Project here at Penn Law. At the end of this discussion, we will welcome audience members to ask questions to our panelists. If you have a question, please write it down on a note card and we will collect those at the end of the session. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Julia. Thank you all of you for being here, for hearing our perspectives, and turning on my mic. Thank you guys for having me anyway, though. There we go. Thank all of you for being here. We appreciate you so much, and we are looking forward to getting into our discussion about the landscape of pardons and expungements in Pennsylvania. Before we jump in, I'd like to give each panelist a chance to introduce themselves and also talk about your connection to the work, what led you to this work, and each of us does come with our own connection, our own story to this process. Start with you, Sabira, if you'd like to discuss how exactly did you get into work?
So I started my career as a public defender. I did that for about 4 years. And then I just realized, I wasn't doing all that I could. So I randomly got connected with Amistad. And when I interviewed them, I'm like, okay, this is a good group of people. I like the work that they're doing. So I just decided to jump in. And it's funny because I do have a background. Like my uncle was serving life in prison. He's a juvenile lifer. I'm actually going to be helping him with his parole prep when he goes up for the board, but that's how I got started in this process. So it's interesting that now I'm working with people who are going out for commutation, especially starting from a public defense sort of standpoint. You don't really see the person at the end when they spend decades in prison. So I think that this work is, for me, eye-opening, and it's helping me to realize, the people behind the decades in the criminal justice system.
That is be former PD, and a lot of PDs were not PDs at all. Just think there's a feeling. I have the case did, but it was so much in the Again, you're to be yourself. Congrats again. To this work and your experience.
Yes. So I began the process when I was having extreme complications with getting employment. To the extent of I was offered a position at Walmart, but after they did a background check, they rescinded it. I was very frustrated in that process. And my sister, who knew about my circumstances, she sent me a Wikipedia about pardon. The buzzword at the time was expungement. Like,
So Wikipedia is a good source.
it's a good source. It's a good source. She sent that to me, and I was reading about it, but I was like, it states that I'm going to take 3 to 5 years. I'm like, I need something more immediate to address my concerns with employment. So from there, it was just like a snowball effect. I just got momentum, got involved with CLS in Montgomery County because at the time I was living in Northtown. Started the pardon application. From there, moved to West Philadelphia and was referred to CLS there, where I was kind of introduced to Brendan and some of the staff there. But how it really got started was Penn Law students. Penn Law students supported me, met me at the Phoenix Hotel at the Starbucks down there, and supported me in drafting my application. So even though Wikipedia was a great source, I found that not many people were aware of what a pardon was, what it took to obtain one, or if anyone had actually ever received one. So because of that, I took the initiative and said, well, I'll go through the process and kind of be like a poster child to then promote, advocate, and make, raise awareness for it. So that's how I got involved.
What year was that? You submitted your application?
Then I submitted the application. That was probably 2017.
And when did you finally get that whole thing?
Uh, 2021. Yeah. Yes, it was a long journey. Yeah.
To speak, you've probably been doing this longer than I. Talk a little bit about how you came into this work.
That's the nicest way of saying old. No, there's nothing I can do about it. It is what it is. I was the kid of lefty college professors, so I was interested in going to public interest work. Dating back to high school. So started at CLS out of law school. I was an Independence Foundation fellow actually at CLS. And then I clerked for a year and came right back to CLS, and so I've been here for almost a long time. And I moved to the employment unit in 2006. I used to do public benefits people represent, but I've been doing employment for 16 years. And, we do this work because our mission in the employment unit, as we see it, is to help people obtain the benefits of work and remove barriers to work. And we were just consistently finding over years that criminal records were probably the single biggest barrier that people faced in finding work. And so there are and have been laws that govern how employers, in theory, are allowed to consider criminal records. And we have brought complaints under those laws. And Philly now actually has a pretty strong fair hiring ordinance. But the truth is that it's always difficult to really enforce those consistently and even-handedly, and stop employers from finding out information that's in the public record, and stop them from denying a job once they've learned about the record, because essentially there's no bar on getting the record. The bar is on when they do it and how they consider it and how they apply it. So it's always been clear that removing the record, expunging it, erasing it, is always going to be superior to attempting to control how employers consider and apply.
We do really from me on it. But it is, like Brenda said, reactive. That means that we are coming in after this after the job. Such a maybe not stable job. But we charge forward. But speaking a little about landscape of legislation protecting those with criminal records, and the key actually. Let's talk a little bit about specifically about politics. We all know that it is not quite a process. We all know that it has laws, Can you talk a little bit about when you left 2017? What did that landscape look like? How were pardons regarded in Pennsylvania? You sit on that board. How does that impact?
At that time, I think it was Lieutenant Governor Stack. He seemed to be open, and I think at that time he was meeting with some post staff members to kind of bridge a gap between people who didn't know anything about pardons. But the political landscape, I feel like politics is at the root of everything. And the more we try to avoid the fact of politics being involved in it, makes it that much more challenging. So when I had an opportunity actually to question the now Lieutenant Governor Fetterman at a church in, I think it was West Philly, about how he was going to change policy as it related to pardons. And I was distraught when he didn't even reply to my answer. Instead, he started talking about fracking and what it was. And I think that's what the audience that he was speaking to wanted to hear about. So he totally disregarded my question. But turns out, he was open to allowing Brandon Flood, to, be the secretary who he had a conviction and now, has moved on from there. But to allow that, to me, you have to have a certain level of being open to allowing people who have a record to demonstrate their abilities. And so for me, that's where the politics is involved. I'm not sure where Shapiro stands in all of it, but I will say this. In my experience from going to some pardon hearings, the person is not politically involved, but has a large influence on the decisions at the Board of Pardons is Gubernick, who's the corrections officer. His tenure ends in 2023, but in regards to as many of the candidates that I've seen for pardons, he's been that one person that stands in the way from them getting that vote. So I don't think that it's always the elected board members, but some of those other members have a larger stake in people actually receiving pardons.
That is absolutely true. And just to recap and to paint a picture of the pardon board for those of you who might not be familiar, there are 5 members of the Board of Pardons, chaired by the current Lieutenant Governor, which right now, for 2 more months, Lieutenant Governor Fetterman. Also, the Attorney General has a permanent seat on the board. Obviously, those 2 are going to be moving on to the better very shortly, but they're also joined by a corrections expert, he mentioned, a psychiatrist right now, who's in front of the chief of the public by the Senate, Dr. John Williams, and a human rights advocate who's special place. Together, the 5 of them form the Board of Pardons. You need 3 out of 5 votes. End of that process. Doesn't matter which 3, doesn't matter if the other 2 swear, you will never see a pardon as long as they live. If you get 3 out of 5 votes, you do pass the Board of Pardons and get a recommendation from that board, which will then ultimately have to be signed by Governor Wolf. That process is going to be very tough. And like he said, it's not all political. It does come down to, we convince someone. Do they believe that you are someone who deserves a pardon? Do they believe you're someone who will never commit? Lots and lots of factors go into that process, but at the end of the day, I think it is true that last week a lot of us exhaled a big breath of relief. We saw the midterm election results. The Lieutenant Governor, of course, was selected by the governor. That had been perhaps a different candidate who was not as put pardon, not as put as other candidates. For parts. I'm glad you were but it's kind of a turning point. I'll say maybe, and Brendan, you probably speak to this as well, but maybe 20 years ago, there really was not a pardon product. It existed, yes, it's constitutionally endowed opinions, but it was a hollow process. It did not actually function. There were maybe less than 50 applications coming to that board a year. And under Lieutenant Governor Fetterman, it's really just blossomed and become something that actually which is great. And that's momentum that we're hoping will keep up. But there's going to be a lot of shifting on that board as Fetterman and Shapiro move on. We'll see. But even in this current climate of, pardons are very possible. There's right now a 2% grant rate for people who complete their application successfully. There is a different landscape, I'll say, for commutation. Severe, I'm hoping maybe you can speak to that, as you do a lot of work around commutation. So,
I do mostly focus on the commutation part of the Board of Pardons. When you mentioned the 3 out of 5 votes that are needed for pardons, unfortunately for people who are going up for commutation, they do need unanimous votes. And for me, I started to realize, the unfairness of the process. Because if these people don't get votes, essentially what the board is saying is that you deserve to die in prison. And the reasoning behind it for me is never really clear. I struggle with the lack of transparency that the process has as a whole. Not only just the fact that it takes 3 to 4 years to even go through the process, but then, you never know why a board member voted for you or didn't vote for you. And for a lot of people, that's hard to process, especially, when they've been in prison for decades. Some people have been in for like 50 years. They've had no misconducts, but yet and still the board decides, this person doesn't decide that or doesn't deserve to come home. That's a harsh reality to live and to be a part of. Um, I don't know how much politics plays into it. I know with the last election, especially with the media, there were a lot of targeted ads about Fetterman as well as Shapiro not being hard on crime. But when you sit through those public hearings and through those interviews, you can see, those people are not just up there for show. They're not just giving people blanket, checks across the board. They are doing their job. They do ask, hard questions. They do get into the facts about cases. They're really weighing their choices up there. And I've said this before that, being a member of the board is a hard job to do because you're weighing, these competing options, these competing opinions. Even if you do think that someone deserves to come home from prison, or doesn't deserve to die in jail, you also have to weigh the option of, public safety, or I have to, make sure that someone or the people that I'm, beholden to are okay with the decisions that I'm making. So yes, like Akeem said, politics always plays a role in the decisions that people make, especially the ones who are elected. I just think that, the whole process is really traumatizing for people. It's traumatizing for, especially when they're going out for commutation, because, someone died in that instance. And so for a lot of the men and women who are going out for commutations, they have to wrestle with the fact that, they played a part in someone losing their life. And they have to go through all of that all over again. And they have to convince 5 different people that they don't deserve to die in prison for the one mistake that they made. So, yeah.
that's a really good point. All of that. I also appreciated you saying that it is a hard job, right? Being that was centering for me to get us. Actually, so it is good to remember that they are also doing it. But it is a difficult process to go from one to, you know, but the process. But could you talk to us about, what that you went through? How you figured that out? Right now, landscape of the planning process for these folks.
So the process was at that time I actually paid to get an application. They have now since changed; it's available online, but I had to pay for it. And my reason for applying for a part was because I couldn't get a job. So I'm like, y'all want me to pay for it, but I don't have a job. So it's like, anyway, paid for it, waited for it to come in the mail, started reading it. And I'm big on language, but some of the verbiage in there I don't understand. Oh man, I think it may be 9, 10, 11. It's a lengthy application. A lot of it is kind of like fill in the blank sections, but the verbiage in there is very confusing. And for someone like myself, I feel like I'm articulate enough to, kind of maneuver through it. But as I said, Penn law students helped me, supported me in my quest. So um, I obtained the application, started reading through it, got support from CLS in Montgomery County, moved from there. Penn law students would meet me. They helped me draft it with a Google Doc. I would add the verbiage. They just typed it up. And from there, it was like, okay, submit the application, but there were other factors that people don't mention, like certificates that I received, volunteer work that I was doing, letters of recommendation. I actually went through the district attorney's office to get a letter of recommendation because, as a part of their merit review, they send the district attorney and the judge a notice saying that you're applying for a pardon. So I felt I would get ahead of the curve and ask the district attorney for a letter of recommendation prior to. I was provided that. Outside of that, I did some, volunteer work, as it was mentioned earlier. Drug addiction is something that plagues both my community and my family. And so I did work with PROACT, which is a prevention recovery organization, Achieving Community Together. So did work with them. And then from there, like I said, I submitted the application, got a call back. Well, no, let me back up. I didn't get a call back. I got a notice in the mail saying that they received it. There's one part where they receive it. That doesn't mean really anything. They just, kind of got it, set it somewhere. But then from there, I got another notice, maybe 6 months later, saying that they actually filed it. Right?
Still doing that today. It's actually about 18 months now. So you get a note eventually that says, hey, we got it. It's here somewhere. We haven't looked at it, but it's here. And then, I don't know, 15 to 18 months after that, they'll be like, we looked at it. Thanks, guys. That's amazing.
Bring to highlight that because it can be different time frames for different people. I'm just giving you my experience, and then so from there, it was the contact from probation and parole to schedule an appointment for me to have kind of like an interview. That was actually a phone call. It was actually a phone call from probation and parole about the appointment for questioning about what I submitted on my application. It's kind of like a verification process to confirm what you're stating on your application is still true. You haven't moved, and your circumstances may or may not have changed. Um, yeah, yeah, that's what it was. From there, I actually got another letter stating that it would be a public hearing, or no, my merit review. My merit review, I actually received a unanimous vote. So with receiving a unanimous vote, I didn't even have to go to Harrisburg for a hearing. I still attended the hearing via Zoom because at that time, pandemic was alive and thriving. So they had Zoom meetings for the public hearing.
Public hearing, basically just a meeting of the board. You're not invited to attend. You are allowed to listen or watch it, stream it, but you're not speaking. You're not representing yourself. You're not making your case. They're making a decision about whether or not that's just based on the papers you submitted thus far. Apparently, you need at least 2 out of 5 votes. If two, you're axed. You're out of the process. You can reapply after the year, I believe, but you and 2 out of 5, that's just 4. I'm actually not sure what that is for conversations.
I think it's 3 out of 5. 3 out of 5.
Yeah. So from there, once I watched the Zoom and already knowing that I was going to be granted a pardon, it wasn't as traumatizing as Sabira said. But from me going to some of the public hearings, it's in a Supreme courtroom, which for me it was definitely traumatizing. Although I wasn't there for my hearing, I don't like court. So yeah, like they're sitting up, kind of looking down on you, and they invite people to come up, and for the vast majority of the people, they were asking them to kind of concede their time of defending themselves or petitioning for their candidacy or likelihood for getting a pardon. But yeah, the Supreme Courtroom is crazy. I received the pardon, got that the notice. I guess I should say the announcement that I would receive a pardon, but I didn't receive it actually until 2021. I came home from vacation actually. It was in the mail. I'm like, what is this big envelope? It was a letter from the governor with that seal on it, and I was like, oh my goodness, this process is finally over, but it isn't. From that part, and I still had to go back to Montgomery County and Philadelphia County to get expunged for the charges. So the pardon is just one aspect of it. So you go through the 3 to 5 year process for that, and still then got to come back to the counties to get an expungement. So that all that process is now completed. So I'm grateful, but it definitely was a tough journey.
It is a yeah, billions left on the back end, which is just the government don't I want to pivot a little bit to expansions, actually, particularly in Philadelphia County. We are fortunate enough to have this attorney really does support expungements. It's very pro second chances, pro community life, pro not wanting to live in America. Right now, we file about 5,000 expungements a year. We have a no objection rate and no argument that we need to come to court with 105%, which is terrific. They do give us a whole 5% for them to go, and we are the only tell them to be quiet and win. So it's fine. But obviously, politics such not to right. Bush to impeach Larry Krasner in the news recently, and regardless of where we may land politically on that sphere, it does have the potential to change a lot of his policies here in Philadelphia. Brendan, I wonder if you could speak to this actually. What do you think President's impact on expungements have been, and what do you think the impact of this impeachment might be on his policies going forward?
I would say there's certainly been a very substantial impact on expungements with the Krasner administration. I think prior to Krasner, my office has been doing expungements for years and years under past DAs as well. And we would just, when you file a petition, the district attorney has the choice of whether or not to oppose the petition. They don't have to. And as Taylor mentioned, the Krasner administration overwhelmingly is filing a notice with the court that they consent to the petition. And we just drew a much higher opposition rate in the past. And that would require going to a hearing and arguing in front of a judge over the Criminal Justice Center, 13th and Filbert. I think it's fair to say that we probably won the substantial majority of the cases that we argued, but we lost some. And probably the biggest burden that imposes on not only organizations like ours, but on petitioners, of people who want an expungement, is that it drags things out and it clogs up the court calendar, and it means that they have a limited number of cases they can hear on any given day. Court is open if any of you are curious about how this goes, by the way. It's 8:05. They hear these petitions. The first thing they hear every day actually is return of property petitions. They used to screw people all the time, and I've noticed they've gotten better about saying, yes, we will let this person have their money back that they should never have been taken from them in the first place. But they still sometimes insist on keeping people's stuff that they've grabbed. But then after they get through that, then they turn to expungements. And again, the vast majority of them don't have to get argued and don't take up time in the calendar. And the court staff know this, and they schedule far more, which is great. Because expungements can be really meaningful. Obviously, in the case of a part of it is a final step to completely erasing something that ought to have been erased. You can also do partial expungements when some charges have been dropped and a person has been convicted in others. So it can make a very, very serious difference in the record that employers and even landlords see. There are background checks. People come to us sometimes because they came into subsidized housing for senior citizens because of an old record of theirs. So the Krasner administration, just by consenting to the great majority, has made a real difference. They certainly don't consent 100% of the time. They still make us argue, but no. But just taking that perspective and kind of making that a policy, and actually the Krasner administration put out a written policy about how they were going to address expungements going forward. which they didn't have to do that either, but that gave us a sense of what to expect filing these petitions, in addition to the policy itself being quite progressive in terms of stating, confirming that they will generally agree. So as to the effects of an impeachment, I feel a little bit at sea. I'm not a political scientist, and I'm not totally certain what that would be. I might take it that impeachment would mean that Krasner would be replaced by one of his deputies. I presume until the next election. But certainly, I think it's clear that Krasner personally has made a point of pushing for policies like these. I know that he's made a point of pushing for staff, attorneys to be hired to work to be not only to argue in court, but attorneys who are developing policies at his office. There was obviously a real turnover. It was in the news that there was a significant turnover at the DA's office when Krasner came in. And, just as another lieutenant governor could dramatically change the way the Board of Pardons handles pardons, and the way that people encounter the process and the amount of time it takes, a new DA could likewise do the same thing and go back to the same old ways pretty easily. So immediately, just on the issue of impeachment, I do think that my sense is that Krasner has successfully brought in a team of people who are on the same page with him, and that I think that the same policies about expungements would likely be honored and observed, at least for the current term that he's in office. But you can never be sure. Impeachment is a pretty dramatic shot across the bow from the state legislature, and just the fact of that, might well affect the way that the office handles things, even before his term.
Could be. I think that we touched on earlier about the political aspect that we've seen during this campaign, right? About veterans, crime, like running streets, and just got to be stopped. I've been enjoying it for 4 weeks straight. It's terrible. I think the really interesting thing there is basically that I think being tied to pardons are being tied to criminals being let loose in the streets and not on what is safe. That's really interesting to me because as someone who does this work, I know that pardons don't let anyone out of jail, right? They're already living next door to you. I'm not sure why we should wave of violence across the state. That's the narrative that the Republicans conservatives have really kind of successfully spun around the campaign. My question, and I'd like each of you to address this, is, how are you, both in your work, in your employment, and also your activism work, you're pushing back against this narrative of part of the conversation being tied to people who do terrible things to the public? How do we change that to people who don't know this process? Spirit, would you start?
Can I just touch on one thing quickly? Because I find that many people who are not Gen X like myself don't necessarily know this story, but every politician, the Willie Horton story, there's a shocking number of people who don't know the name Willie Horton. Every politician in America knows the name Willie Horton. Willie Horton wasn't even part of it, was actually a furlough program, and a furlough program that Massachusetts borrowed from Ronald Reagan's California. But nevertheless, Willie Horton was a guy who was let out of prison on furlough and committed a horrible, violent crime. And that was turned into a frankly racist political ad attacking Michael Dukakis in the 1988 presidential election. I say racist because the guy who was responsible for it apologized for the ad on his deathbed. But that was too late at that point. George Bush won the election. It was large, and Dukakis had been leading the polls. It was widely viewed that ad had a big impact. And so, people who want to achieve elective office in this country, have that lesson, I think, imprinted on them by their advisors.
Still,
I think the biggest thing that I do, because I don't focus on like the general public, but I focus on my clients and I try to help my clients understand that, I don't judge them for the mistake that they made. I see them as a person, and so we focus on the person, and we're trying to get the board to focus on the person. I think that's how I approach my process for all of my compensation clients. That's how I speak to their family members, their friends, their support systems, and even just, with my own background, that's how I speak to my own family members, my friends, the people that I interact with. Because I think that's the biggest thing for us to do, especially us who are doing this job, because we know things inside that normal people on the street don't know. They don't know what compensation is, they don't know about the process. Like in their minds, they're just like, oh, okay, someone went to jail, maybe they'll come home, maybe they won't. But they don't really know the intricacies of the process. And so I feel like it's important for me, especially, because I've been doing this job and because I did start as a public defender, I try to make people see like, these are people. We have to focus on the person. It's not just always about the fact that they made a mistake, because we all make mistakes. Who would want to, spend decades in prison based on one thing that they did wrong in their life? No one. So that's what I try to bring to the table. That's what I try to make other people see. People.
And I was like, who's less likely to commit a crime than just going back inside than someone who just spent 40 years inside and just right? That's the one thing, which is the worst that can happen. So it still doesn't work either. It's just peace.
Yeah. Advocacy wise, I think I start with verbiage. Like I said, language is big for me. So I don't consider myself or anyone who has been inside a returning citizen. I'm someone who's directly impacted by the injustices, directly impacted, right? So I start with citizenship, start with governance, and then education. The governance aspect is I really didn't have any understanding of inner workings of government. I took a Citizens Leadership Academy in Montgomery County, learned about parks and recreation and things of that nature, because it wasn't something to me that mattered. So to me, advocating for people to take advantage of that, it was a free class. A city council member up there, or borough council member suggested it. I made a lot of different connections there. And then education, like civic engagement, the right to vote. One of my mentors told me, do not relinquish your power. And your power is in your voice and that choice to vote. I can honestly say to you guys, prior to 2017, I didn't care. I didn't vote when Obama ran. My grandmother was not pleased with the fact that I didn't. But I told her, I said, voting at that time for me didn't matter, wouldn't change anything. But since then, again, my perspective has changed, my life has changed. But the education part, again, is civic engagement, putting yourself in different platforms and arenas where you can learn more, expand your knowledge, and, and get some valuable resources. So those are the things for me that I advocate for in regards to people who have the experience that I have, or even worse. But in a professional space, I again launched my own company, opposed to allowing employers to dictate terms to me, because that Pennsylvania is an at-will state. They can at any time call you in and sit you down and say, okay, cool, well, we appreciate your services, but now it's time to go. So opposed to doing that, I'm suggesting people start their own company. I mean, I know it's a tall task, may take 3 or 4 years, like the process of a pardon, but I think you have a lot better chances of reaching success and fulfillment in doing that. Yeah.
Yes. One of the small part of who we all are, because we've all done things plans for breakfast, right? Not to talk about it because it's important, but we've all probably done things that ended up with us. Some of us are more likely to be exposed to law enforcement. Some of us are more likely to be in places where we will face consequences for those actions. But we don't have mistakes. Thank you.
I was going to also, I think, answer your question about how do we push back on that narrative. I just wanted to mention briefly one thing that we try to do in my office as much as I can is refer people to these studies by criminologists who have actually looked into recidivism and the likelihood of someone reoffending. And there is, I think, a very, very widely held stereotype that society is divided into like law-abiding citizens and criminals, and people who've committed a crime fall into the category of criminals, and we can't trust them in the future because they're criminals, they've committed crimes. In fact, people have studied this and looked at this and concluded, when enough time has gone by, people, even after an arrest, if it's been 4 years, if it's been 7 years, are often no more likely to reoffend than any random member of the general public. And so that's been established. Multiple independent studies have confirmed this. The EEOC has cited these studies. I love pointing people to this footnote in the EEOC guidance where they list these studies. So that's just a really important thing to know. I mean, it's not just hot air. It's not rhetoric. I mean, it's been established by academic studies.
Questions?
But I was wondering if any of you could speak to the intersection between immigration consequences and pardons, and whether any of you are doing any work related to lateral immigration consequences or the exclusion of immigrants from these pardon benefits.
Sure, that's a good question. I do some work around the intersection of the people about conviction law, but I can say that there is a very shaky landscape, unfortunately, when it comes to the effects of a pardon on improving someone's immigration. By which I mean, there is right now, and perhaps Brandon can speak to this, there is a lot of legislation stating that is exempt from, kind of records, that pardon not for someone, so you will have record for returning citizenship or status adjustment. So it can be very, very tricky, and I tend to advise my pardon clients who don't have citizenship or green card status that they need to consult an immigration attorney before we even file a pardon application, before we even file a petition for asylum. Sometimes they can not only not help the inconsistency for that person, to the family.
I do not. I'm sorry. I don't have any experience with it. And like Taylor said, it is a rough process for anybody who's going through it. The only experience I've ever had was in regards to criminal, actually defending a criminal case. But as far as pardons, I have no experience with that. No.
I'll just say also, we in my office try to be very conscious of the fact that we're not immigration specialists. In fact, we regularly make a point of talking to folks who are and try to consult with folks at Nationality Services Center and HIAS when we have immigration questions. For sure, anytime we're representing someone and then trying to get their record expunged, we always advise them that it's really critical that they get a certified copy of the full case file before it gets expunged, because again, I think as Taylor mentioned, our understanding is that it can make things even worse if you try to adjust your status in the future. They do not have to respect expungement orders. They do not have to respect sealing decisions. They can insist that you come up with all these records about specifically what happened in your case, and if you don't have them because they've been destroyed, that can really badly damage your chances. Federal law can be changed. I think it's fair to say that there has been a move, a general slow move, but distinct move towards expanding opportunities for people to clear their records and get a second start. And there's been some bipartisan support for that at the federal level. It's most certainly at the state level here in Pennsylvania. There is no, federal expungement. There's no federal statute requiring ICE to, respect, expungement orders and sealing orders, but there could be. It's the kind of thing that newly sworn in Senator John Fetterman could introduce on the floor.
What advice would you give any of these people wanting to go into criminal reform? What tell them to follow? What coach tells them to shape their patches? start for myself at the step. Keep your minds open. I came out of law school hardcore public defender, Gideon's Army for life, and very shortly fell like severe and physical. That's a little bit like I was not doing enough for clients, getting into the work. Also having watched family members processing how to leave the stuff and feeling like I gotta fix it. And I think I just felt like there's more to do outside of this stuff. But, that might not be you, right? You might not know what you want to do today, in 5 years, in 10 years. Keep in mind your first job is not going to be your last job, right? Just always keep your mind open. No matter how your passion might change, you will always find your ways to do stuff. Good part of your work that you don't care about. So,
I think that's a great idea. Always keep your options open, or just keep your mind open to new things because you never know when something's gonna, spark your interest. I feel like while you guys are in school, if you have the opportunity to, intern with any legal organizations, you definitely should because that's a great way to see what the process is like on the inside and see if, you know, anything sparks your interest at that point. Um, yeah, that's pretty much.
That's a great question, and I'm sorry I didn't respond to the young lady there. That was a great question as well. I had limited experience with immigrants, but I will say I did meet a gentleman who was potentially going to be deported. And the only thing I could recommend to him was to contact an immigration attorney prior to even considering a pardon. Um, for you guys, yes, like Taylor said, you are potentially the next district attorney, Supreme Court judge, Senate, defense attorney, a defender, even. Don't allow what that rank or title is to determine how much you're invested in the people that you're representing, and then have a real broad mind about what can be changed, but staying at the core of your values and beliefs. I think we've all had different experiences in our lives that center us around those values and beliefs, and so sticking true to that, but also having an open mind to change. Because, like Brendan said, policy is what governs everything. So if you have some values and beliefs, stick to that and potentially change policy. That's the thing that I really think about is policy change. Anything can be contested with pardons. There's really no governance around it. No law that says this is that or this is, they operate kind of off the whim. And so if there's some areas where you feel compelled to, lend your voice to it, lend your time, invest in that. That's all I would say.
I can't really top that. I want to say ditto to what all three of my fellow speakers have said. Um, yeah, I don't know that I have any secrets to share. Sorry, but absolutely, I think for sure, trying to work with public interest organizations while you're in law school is great. Trying to just network and make contacts with people who do work that you're interested in. Something I was bad at myself in law school. I really lucked out with the Independence Foundation Fellowship. I should say, I actually learned about that through somebody who graduated a year ahead of me and just told me, "Oh, did you know about this?" And I didn't. And they said, "Oh, you should apply." And so I was actually someone that I met doing um, clinical work, representing clients at the Legal Aid Bureau on campus. And she graduated a year ahead of me and then told me about this fellowship to work in legal services. So I guess that was a little bit of networking. All right, I'm going to pat myself on the back for my great skill at networking.
Could look at you've been talking about it in a way that was somewhat more political, perhaps. But Willie Horton effect made it hard for Shapiro, who wanted to run for governor, to vote for the commutations because of the risk of recidivism. So Governor Shapiro, or Governor-elect Shapiro, may not always have been present when positive votes for commutation were granted. The problem with regard to commutation in particular has to do with the LWOP. Pennsylvania has a tremendous number of people who are serving life without the possibility of parole. There's no way to avoid death by incarceration except to get a pardon, which is a political process. Before there were professionals involved in facilitating pardons for people, there were grassroots organizations which could not get the kind of funding that the professionals can get. Grassroots advocacy has played an important role, I think, in lighting the fire under some of these politicians who are dependent upon Black votes. I mean, to be truthful, this is a Black and brown problem, more so than any other way of looking at it. And I guess I'm wondering what you think about the significance of lawyers being involved in grassroots movements to change the availability with regard to pardons and expungements, but also to pass legislation which will get rid of mandatory minimums for second degree, establish the right of parole for people who are convicted of homicide. There's legislation that's been proposed. And where do you stand with regard to that, given that you are professionals, you are legal professionals, as opposed to grassroots?
I think that's a really good point, and I would say grassroots organizations are still getting the key puts the terrible committee that they private feature have had on the system. There is a rule, but it does have to come being impacted by the system. I will say that the other part of the question about legislation about mandatory minimum like is huge. It's a different approach than I think most of us do with direct service here are able to engage in fully, and it also is a little more difficult because it is still political. Right? There is legislation pending to change. There is legislation pending to change mandatory minimum, but that's always going to depend on the composition of the Senate and the Congress, right? So in the interim, we've got to have that, just like I'm talking this, as it hits the floor, we've got to keep doing our director report to help folks keep getting access to a process that is churning out, license. I'm sorry?
House is now 100.
Yeah, it is.
So, and there are two people who might break the tie, and there's a good prospect of there being Democrats.
I'm always a political pessimist, but you're
I think Taylor made an interesting point about we being a support system for the grassroots organizations, because I'm of the opinion that lawyers don't know everything, and the people who know what they want, what they need, are the community members. And so, whatever we can do to assist them, I feel like that's our role. Our role isn't to step into any sort of leadership around it, because a lot of these people, they already know what they want. They just need help with trying to figure out the process. So that's part of what we do at Armistead as well. We have a group of, I think it's about 10 or 15 of us, where we discuss, ways in which we can help the community. We're working with students, not from Penn, from Drexel, but we're working with students and community members to figure out, okay, how can we as a group do what's necessary? And the people who are leading our conversations are the people who are most affected by it, which are the community members. We play a background role in it. I think we are a great support system, but these people, they don't need us to think for them. They just need us to figure out, okay, legally, what can we do? And that's our role.
I feel like I can add to that. That was a great point, That first. Um, yeah, we stand on the shoulders of a foundation that those grassroots organizations have established. I read something, and I think it said Hibernin, which is tied to government, but it's a nautical term for steering the ship. And as Taylor mentioned, I'm a part of the Pardon Project Steering Committee with Pulse, and we kind of steer that ship and guiding them in regards to how we best need support and the different issue-based challenges that, as a committee, we're finding. So yeah, grassroots is still at the core of it. I think now it's a more populated nonprofit space where people are getting involved in that. But I met a defender and she said to me, Akeem, I know how to lead from the back. And I think that's the attorney's role, is to lead from the back. Allow us to steer the ship, but you lead from the back in a supportive way. I'm big on language. I don't like help. So if you came to help, you're wasting your time, right? Help is in a savior type of setting. I don't like that at all. If you're here to support, then we can work together for liberation. That's where I end.
Um, yeah, that's a very important perspective, and I do earnestly try to keep that in mind. I was at an event with some other advocates one time, and I just remember somebody saying on the matter of working with lawyers, and lawyers sometimes tendency to want to insist that things be done in a lawyerly fashion. I just remember this one person saying, "I never want to be anybody's client," and that was a really striking thing to hear. Because as a lawyer, people who are my clients, I'm responsible. I feel like I have a duty to them, really a professional duty, an ethical duty. And I do think of them in a certain way, as, handling things for them and having the work of their case go through me. But that's not the relationship that they want to define all of their efforts to create change, for sure. And so that's a very important thing to keep in mind, and it's a good thing for lawyers to be reminded of.
Talking about the landscape for whether it's favorable to move legislation like and further changing the pardon process. I noticed, in the past 5 to 10 years, there's been a lot of change around how we frame work. It's gone from being something liberal to something that I'd love if each of you could speak a little bit about what do you think about that approach, about making pardons and criminal legal reform something that is not a political issue, that's a societal issue, that's something you're all invested in. It is in a lot of ways a black and brown issue. It is in a lot of ways a liberal issue. But what about making it something that is a Pennsylvania issue? Is there value to that? Are there disadvantages to that? But here. Yeah.
I will simply say, my organization has long worked with Republicans. Republicans have long controlled both houses of the state legislature, and we have successfully worked with Republican and Democrat co-sponsors to pass legislation on a variety of issues relating to criminal justice. And most recently, we were working on occupational licensing reform to try to we helped with getting both sides of the aisle to come together to pass a bill that was intended to make it easier for people with records to get licensed by the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. Um, um, I suppose there's probably something of a trade-off in terms of thinking of what you're doing as part of a liberation movement when you're appealing to people who view themselves as staunchly conservative. Um, but there's room for both, and I will just say that CLS as a nonprofit or a 501c3, we're nonpartisan by definition, and so that's we certainly we try to work with community groups, and we try to push for change that will you know I think we're very conscious that it, predominantly affects Black and Brown communities, and we are conscious of that and embrace that. But we also show up in, very conservative senators' offices in Harrisburg, and they sit down with us, and they don't embrace revolution, but they embrace, other aspects of the issue that are of concern to them, to the business community, to their constituents, to the business community's desire to have a wider pool of employees. So we push where we can, but for sure we make the case to even those who are broadly conservative, let's say, that this can benefit them as much as we're able to make that case.
Yeah. Yeah, that's uh something I really don't know much about Tim, but I'll say this. That the momentum that I feel like has been established around pardons, commutation, expungements is from both sides. I think there's always an effort to distinguish ourselves or make a distinction between two groups of people. But if again you have values and beliefs that you stand on and is at your core, it shouldn't matter what party you're in or whether you're Muslim or Christian or straight or gay. None of those things matter. In fact, some of your core values and beliefs would benefit everyone, the larger community. Part of one of the organizations I was with was like each of us needs all of us, and so I need law students, I need volunteers, I need attorneys. Everybody has a role to play, and it's about identifying what your role is and just being empowered in that. That's all I'll say.
I think my biggest thing that I tell people is, you know, we don't understand the situation of the system until we're in it. And so I've had many family members who were not Black or Brown who came to me, asked me for assistance with their family members who are going through this process. And, the overwhelming thing that they say is, I knew nothing about this. I didn't know that this was an issue. And it's unfortunate that, the first time that they are on board with this sort of thing is when, someone in their life is dealing with it. But that's the reality of the world that we live in. People care about what affects them. And so we have to make people realize, this affects all of us. It doesn't just affect one or, one segment of the population. I think that's the only way that anything is really going to change. People start realizing how it affects them. Then they'll get on board and, you'll see more of a change.
I think we are coming to the end of our time. We might have time for maybe one more question if there's anyone else. Going once, going twice, stole. Well, thank you, panelists. You're all amazing. We appreciate you. Part of the project. And everyone have a wonderful day.
That was great.
Put these in.